Dude, I told you we were gonna get lost! It was your idea to come here in the first place!
Guys, I thought I heard something!
Today we have a very special guest, Minta Carlson. I've been looking forward to chatting with you. We are really excited to have Minta. She is an AI architect who works on workflow development and exploratory applied research. So glad to have you. And we have quite a few different questions to go over, but in general, just really interested in what you're working on, and also your journey as a creative, as an artist. So let's jump into that. In terms of like your background, right? You had mentioned you have a background in theater, so I would absolutely love to hear about that.
Yeah, so I've always been sort of STEM adjacent, which is really fun. I went to school for theater directing and
Okay.
playwriting, but actually originally was a dual major in chemistry as well, because I've
Oh
always
wow.
sort of
Okay.
had that kind of like that technical mindset, but I've found that the creative fields are just a lot more fulfilling. And that's always been what's happened for me is I'll start to get into something more technical, and then I'm like, oh, but I just love being able to tell stories and explore and you know experience things that elicit like real emotion. And that was to me always what was so exciting about theater is that
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
a live experience and it's something that people actively engage with and feel from. So I find that AI is sort of an unusual but natural extension of a lot of those pieces. It's such like a
Hmm.
tool and like a collaborator that it feels very comfortable as a director.
I got you. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That real-time experience in a theater is like nothing else, I think, in art. You're in a room full of people, and these actors that have just like studied profusely are presenting what they consider to be their best, right, on stage. That made me think. The real-time experience made me think of something else, which is um, AI models seem to be kind of starting to move into real-time experiences. There's been a few AI models that I have experimented with. I believe Flux has one that's real time, and I found that to be really interesting. We have world models on the horizon, so I'd love to hear your take on that. The theater background, you have that real time sort of interaction between the audience and the actors, but it does seem like we're seeing the next, not the exact same thing, but a different iteration of a real time experience in a way. Have you played around with those models at all, or even just an opinion about where that's moving towards?
Oh, for sure. So like the current models that can support that, there's a few different ones. A lot of models have LoRa's trained for them now, which
Yeah.
basically quantize or distill the model so that it generates much more quickly. And what that looks like is it sort of finds the path from noise, which is what all models start with, is this sort of Gaussian noise, and follows that path more quickly. It has better understandings of like how to get from point A to point B, so you can do it in
Right.
4 steps instead of 30. I'm actually not a huge fan of those models yet. I find that
Okay. Yeah.
the trade-off with like consistency and quality is not my favorite. And unfortunately, because a lot of people will look at those models and think like, oh, it's like a drafting mode, so I should be able to like
Mm.
easily extend. This is why I don't like them, because
Yeah.
they clients I've had before have thought like, oh, well, we can take this very like quick model and then we'll extend it once we find something we like to a longer generation time and higher quality. But
Mm.
the actual way that these models work, that model is going to generate something very different than the slower, higher quality model based on like how generative AI works and the
Yeah.
way that diffusion works. So in theory, I like the idea of like a faster model. But in practice, I think that the models that I've seen that are highest performing are still the big models. And so they do take a lot of GPUs to do
Yeah.
well. And even the distilled version of those big models are not sub-second yet. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely will admit it. The output it has, the real time models, it looks like stable diffusion from like 4 years ago. So
Yeah.
it's agreed there. It's not perfect just yet.
But it's exciting that it's
Yeah.
out there.
It is. Yeah, it does feel like it's at its infancy the way Midjourney maybe was like 4 years ago, and it looked very, very basic.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference between your, the theater and also AI. Like, what happened in between that kind of made that massive shift? You are deep into it right now. I feel like when I've talked to you, you're like, and on your LinkedIn, you're just experimenting almost every day. I love seeing that.
Yeah. So I actually had sort of a complex journey. I
Yeah.
worked with theater for a while, and like
Mhm.
most creatives who are like trying to break into those industries, I did a lot of restaurant work and
Okay.
was like very much like in that world. And then I think around 2018, myself and my current consulting partner, we
Mhm.
had been like creative partners for a while before that, but we started to build, ironically, a candle business like randomly. We
Okay.
were living on the East Coast, and we decided to like go all in on like building out this sort of like witchy apothecary candle business, which is
I
very
like that.
relevant to this podcast, not usually relevant to the conversations I have with people, but it was
Yeah.
I was actually one of the foremost speakers on Swedish folk magic at the time. That's why I was
Oh
like, oh,
wow.
Midsummer.
Oh, okay,
Um,
that's amazing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So in the US, there's Swedes who are much bigger and better at that than I was. And yeah, I did a lot of really cool stuff at that time. But then the pandemic happened, which wasn't the end of the world for my business. Actually, it was like a great time for people who were doing like craft businesses because there's sort of this
Absolutely.
influx of money and all of this stuff.
Mhm.
But then end of the pandemic, a lot of those businesses kind of fell flat. And I was living in at that time, I was living in Portland, Maine, which was a tourist town. And we're getting ready for like the first post-pandemic sort of tourists. We got this new space like right on the harbor, and just the entire downtown was dead. And my understanding is that is still the case, that it never quite recovered.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we had to pivot the summer of 2022, and I actually had just gone to Sweden for Midsummer to do a Swedish magic
Mhm.
tour with a group of people and like drive them around and work with a local guide to show them old Bronze Age sites and things
Oh
like
wow.
that.
Wow. Wow.
And when I got back, I was like, my business is dying. What am I gonna do? And I
Sure.
was so like, honestly, like really depressed. And I started
Mhm.
messing around with Midjourney, which was like really early Midjourney. I think it was still V2.
Yeah.
And then it quickly went to V3. And I actually have it here. Let me grab it. I don't usually
Yeah.
have this on hand either. But I designed a tarot deck with my collaborative partner using Midjourney V3, and you can see it here.
Oh
Like
wow.
it was a
That's
pretty
awesome.
pretty comprehensive tarot deck. We sold like a bunch of them I think it
Yeah.
was actually
Yeah.
maybe the first tarot deck made with AI.
Yeah.
So that was really cool and fun, and that was just sort of a fun experiment and just something to like feel creative when I was
Okay.
feeling so tapped out.
Okay.
But I got really into the space after that, and that was when I learned about Stable Diffusion, which had just been released, and fine tuning. And I
Mhm.
started to learn how to fine tune, and quickly things picked up, and it was just like
Yeah.
immediately a passion, immediately something I felt really aligned
Mm.
with.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting you had it was like a pit stop of you mentioned witchy candles and then Swedish uh
Folk magic, yeah,
folk
yeah.
magic. Okay. Yeah, that is kind of relevant to what we were building,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
with a movie. Well, you mentioned Midsummer, which is behind me. Um I'd like to dive into that a little actually. I mean because
Sure.
there's um I find with creatives there seems to be more or less sometimes some sort of a spiritual exploration. Art at its
Yeah.
heart is an exploration, sometimes, at least for myself, of these concepts of the soul, of growth, of spiritual growth. I have certainly felt that myself. So I did want to ask, like, what was it like for you to dive maybe a little into that? And also the tarot deck is interesting to me too. I'm into it. I consider myself there's a spiritual journey going on, I think.
Sure.
And my partner got me into it. She's very much into tarot, and I did my first reading on my birthday last year.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
When's your birthday?
It is next month on the 8th.
Oh, so you're a Cancer.
I am a Cancer. I
Nice.
cry all the time, apparently, according to the
That-
stars in the tarot.
Cancers are have
Sensitive-
a deep sensitivity, but also like a layer of guardedness on the outside. They're not crying in front of everybody.
No, just in front of my partner. But
I'm
anyway,
a Pisces,
yeah.
so I do cry in front of everybody. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, yeah. So my partner's a Pisces too. We're both water
Oh,
signs.
cool.
So it's
Nice,
a very
nice.
interesting sort of mix of sensitivity.
No, that's
I love-
perfect.
It is, yeah. No, it works out for us. But I'd like to hear more about that, like your the spiritual journey and what that was like for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's ongoing. I do have
Absolutely.
to say, and it's you could probably do a whole podcast on that specifically. So
Absolutely, yeah.
I won't talk about
Yeah.
everything. But so I would consider myself like an animist. I find like
Okay.
the way that I would define that is, or the alignment that I have with how other people define it is, I feel like there's spirits all around in different ways and shapes and forms, and I think that you can really connect with those on deeper levels. And I did actually like study old Swedish folk magic, which has
Right.
literally been like written and passed down for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Amazing.
So that is a
Yeah.
it's a really interesting journey. In fact, like part of the reason I remember seeing Midsummer when I was in the middle of doing a lot of that type of like work and exploration prior to AI. And it's amazing how much of that movie is pretty grounded, like some of the more like magic-y parts, while other parts are not at all grounded. Like some of the cultural parts don't really make sense. It's like so obviously not shot in Sweden for anyone who's been to Sweden. It's like, okay, this isn't
Okay.
Sweden.
Yeah.
But that being said, like some of like the folk magic they talk about, I've read those stories before. Like a lot. So the really interesting thing about Sweden is that the priests would actually ride around Sweden and write down all of the folk beliefs, and like there's all these catalogs of like folk beliefs. So you can find these old spells and stuff that priests just like cataloged. And some of them are in like old archives and stuff like that. But Sweden's really good at like preserving information like that. So yeah, I assume that Ari Aster looked into that because some of those are quite consistent. But yeah, in terms of like sort of spirituality, there's so many nuances to it. But I believe in a lot of different like spiritual principles. But I also believe that the things that we use as the stories for our spiritual experience, like let's say we're talking to particular spirits in our stories, those are how our mind rationalizes something that is happening in a space and in a realm that we can't, and I don't mean like realm like necessarily magical realm, but like a quantum realm even, that we can't truly rationalize. So I think that pretty much all like interpretations of spiritual contact and experience have merit and are often more reflective of someone's context for them and how they absorb them. And I think that like the difference between someone who's like a practitioner and like really gets deep with this stuff and someone who just sort of likes to experience something that feels spiritual is knowing that it's all a construct that you're using to unpack something deeper that you might not be able to put into full words.
Absolutely, and it sounds like your family background is Swedish, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm Carlson. Yeah, my dad's family, actually some of my mom's family too, but like much further back. But I still have family in Sweden. That's
Oh
why I
wow.
thought when
Okay.
I saw the poster, I was like, oh, that's so ironic because this week is Midsummer. Midsummer's on Friday.
Oh,
So Midsummer
I had
Eve is on Friday, and then Yeah,
yeah.
the way that it works in Sweden is they pick a Saturday each month. I think it's the fourth Saturday of the month. And that's when, it might be the third though, and that's when Midsummer is, and then the Friday is Midsummer Eve. So it's
Mm,
never the same day every year,
okay.
because they want to be able to have the vacation on Friday, Saturday.
Okay. Wow, that's like perfect timing
Yeah,
and alignment, honestly.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's funny about this poster is it was literally put up today because this
Oh, that's
wall,
really funny.
yeah, so this wall was blank and I needed something horror related for this podcast. On the last one, it's just a blank wall. So
Yeah.
this was put up about 2 hours ago.
That's some, so that to me like is synchronicity. Like, and that's what I think
Absolutely.
is really interesting.
Yeah.
And what I
Yeah,
get really into is
absolutely.
this, yeah, this
Yeah.
idea of
Yeah.
synchronicity. Yeah, I was out at this really cool place in Italy, I think when we first
Mhm.
connected, called Domenher, which is like
Okay.
all these old temples built in the 60s and 70s in these Italian mountains. The New York Times
Yeah.
just did like an article on it, but
Hmm.
they're all about synchronicity, and so that's been like a theme for
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting when things seem to align in that way. I would say the poster, your background, and all of that seems very, very timely, suspiciously timely
Yes.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I think the spirituality convo is a good segue into maybe some of the comments Guillermo del Toro has made recently about because he has a very spiritual slant to his work, and it exists in the fantastical. It exists in his upbringing. It's a very strong Catholic presence and upbringing in Mexico across Latino culture, and as you mentioned, every culture has these stories. Like Sweden has their own stories, Mexico has their own stories. Spain is big on horror too. Um, the specific comment I'm thinking about, and I don't know if you heard this, is he said using AI is like spitting on the face of God, and he
Mm.
takes it so, and I respect this so much, which is he views his art form almost like his own religion. That is the vibe I get. He's never said that, but it does seem like a spiritual, almost a ritual for him. It's a lot of these. I think film for a lot of directors is a sacred art form, and they see that sort of sacred purity threatened by AI. That is my read on it. It could be different, and there's this a lot of chatter about it has no soul. So the
Yeah.
technology does surface some interesting existential and spiritual questions for certain people. So that's where I'm at with that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so it's really, taking it out of the AI context and like zooming
Yeah.
out. I haven't really ever thought about this, but it's a really interesting
Mm.
question that
Yeah.
now is coming up for me, which is what
Yeah.
does someone like or Guillermo del Toro, how does he feel about something like Santeria? Like, is he comfortable with witchcraft, or is he a little
Yeah.
more Catholic and a little more like these are separate?
Yeah.
And Catholicism and God is the context that I want to work from and what feels safe, because that would explain a lot about
Yeah.
maybe his opinion on AI and sort of how intense it is. And I can't speak to that. I don't know, because
Yeah.
I've obviously watched his work before, but I've never like sat down and thought about how he's communicating sort of the non-Christian aspects. And when I really reflect on them, I'm starting to wonder,
Mm.
are those typically depicted in a positive light, or
Mm.
are those always a little insidious? Because I've, when I was in the folk magic spaces, I did have a lot of friends in that space who were traditional Santeria and traditional like root work folks from multiple different Latin American cultures. It's definitely true that when you look at sort of the dichotomy between this idea of soul and spirits, between like really strict Catholicism, which my mom grew up Catholic. I have like Catholic family. I have a Mexican American uncle. I'm not unfamiliar with these practices, but definitely I wonder, and I'm curious your thought. Like, do you have any sense from his themes? Because I haven't studied his work that closely. Like how he set. Yeah, I'm curious.
I do have a book. I actually want to bring it out. Just 1 second.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It is a book I did start reading. So it's called Guillermo del Toro at Home with Monsters.
Okay, cool.
And it is a collection of all the monsters he has created since he was a child. And he speaks about. I obviously don't want to speak for him too much, but
no, for sure. But I mean, you examine people's work, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So he does talk about his experiences with Catholic imagery as a child. Right. But also his fascination with losing himself in creatures, losing himself as a way of escape and exploration of religion. So I take it's not a rejection or a full acceptance of it. It's more of a exploration through some imagery that is grotesque, that is visceral at times, but there is this fantastical element that I think is there's a bit of also gentle sort of touch to his work, but I'm sure I can pull a quote on this book later on and edit it into
no worries. I mean, so like without knowing for sure like how he lands between that sort of like the really witchy side of things and the Catholic side, knowing that he's probably open to some of it, and hearing this idea of like spitting in the face of God. I mean, there are aspects of that which if you are someone who believes in like Christianity in that deep way, believes in a monad, right? Believes in sort of this demiurgical monad that exists, then yes, to create something that mirrors humanity and mirrors human thought and pretends to be a person is spitting in the face of God. I mean, yes, that is an accurate perspective of what that is if we're treating it like that. And I think that's where things get a little complex, because I would say that LLMs and like Claude, ChatGPT, that sort of thing, I think you can make a little bit of an argument that the way that they have been orchestrated tries to communicate, because it's a capitalist society and they're trying to sell a product that works for people, tries to communicate a level of humanity and a level of like, I am a person. Even when they're like, I'm not a person, like they are communicating with people as though they're people. I can see how that would be really disturbing for someone who has like a strong sense of relationship with like sort of this spiritual hierarchy and what's allowed to create life. I would then carve out the image and video side and say nothing about image and video AI ever pretends to be like functionally intelligent. It is so like it gets complex and fraught when you get into the LLM side because of how it's been orchestrated. And earlier LLMs, I actually made a whole book for the tarot deck with novel AI at the time, which is like a really early LLM that was not very good. Like it was just, but it helped you like finish like concepts, and it was like really, I felt very divinatory because it was so uncontrolled that like it didn't feel smart. It felt like this weird other spirit that you're talking to, that has a whole different understanding of the world. But yeah, with image and video, I think that we do have to sort of address those a little bit separately when it comes to like an intelligence, and that's where I disagree with some of the takes that I've heard from Guillermo del Toro. I think he conflates a lot of different AI and a lot of different uses of AI into one, where I do genuinely think that image and video can be used just as a tool, like just like an extension of VFX, that gets creators faster to an end result. And I do caution people around using LLMs as replacements for their own mind. It's not healthy and it's not good for you.
Right.
It should be used as a tool and an extension, not as a replacement for human thought.
Absolutely. And a large reason for the podcast is to speak with people like yourself that have a balanced view of this, because what we're hearing a lot is you're either anti or you're pro. There's really no facilitation of a conversation where someone who is into AI is also saying, hey, like there are dangers. It's not like I'm all in or like I am pro AI like 24/7. I mean, there are real ethical considerations.
Yeah.
And the approach we're taking is that, as you mentioned, it's a tool, and this platform is an attempt at making the evolution of a specific genre that we love, making that evolution centered around artists who actually understand, hey, AI is here to stay. Let's ensure artists are the ones that help it evolve versus a corporation. And that's always been my thing, is artists shouldn't sit on the sidelines. It's so important for us to kind of rise up right now and dictate the direction of how this is going. And totally on board with that. So, we're getting into some of the ethics, right? And you train a lot of these models. So I was curious if you've ever encountered any issues with bias and the way these models they output either a very specific type of sort of style, or even people. I mean, I have a friend who, and I was generating, the prompts were witches dancing around a fire, okay? And every single woman was, they all looked like blonde models, right? It's every single one. And she just said, hey, like, that's not realistic, a depiction of what that might look like. So it was an interesting comment, and I really had to take that and be like, you know what, you're right. Like, this is the model output what it thinks it should be, and it thought it should be a group of Caucasian women that are blonde, like that, look like models, which is also a not accurate representation of people and their bodies, right? So that was an interesting convo. So I'm just curious about that.
I mean, especially in the context of the horror genre, where I think you see more normal human bodies than most other genres, not always within a horror context. There's just more permissiveness around, like, a more realistic experience. And so, like, I think that all of the models have biases, many biases. And I think that what I like to point to is not so much the bias, because the bias is actually super easy to untrain, but rather the complexity around how that bias occurred. Because oftentimes you get sort of this sense of like, oh, this bias exists because some person prioritized X data. And to a certain degree, that's true. Like, to a certain degree, there's probably more clips of blonde women in these data sets. Yeah. But the other piece you have to think about is it's not just that we have like all of these examples. These models work in these like very complex ecosystems of connections. So like patterns, basically. So when you have this idea of a woman in your prompt, it is also looking at all the other words in your prompt and thinking about how, or like identifying, I shouldn't even say thinking, it's identifying like the paths that would naturally occur based on all the different things it's seen. So oftentimes what happens is there are certain like types of things that just get baked in because they exist on a lot of different points. It's not just that like they're there in abundance, but they're there in a really like complex distribution that bakes them in. And then there are like style biases that have nothing to do with the model being undertrained on something, but have everything to do with just how diffusion works. Like I do a lot of 2D work, and something really interesting about 2D, and I imagine this would actually also occur in some of like the more bespoke sort of like soft horror styles. But basically there's a lot of stuff that falls into, we think about diffusion as low noise and high noise during the diffusion process, and low noise happens first and figures out like the general composition, like general color, etc. Right. And then high noise is sort of this like really refining pass that like really converges on detail work. And so a lot of models are overfit on concepts that relate to high noise because it trains much faster, and the models are typically not being optimized for that because it's a smaller subset of things that rely so heavily on high noise being perfect. So that's why like a model like LTX, which a lot of people use, LTX 2.3, really cool model, so many ways you can train it, but it struggles with 2D because it's actually sacrificed aspects of that high noise piece to be able to support more complex generation for things like realism. So yeah, bias is interesting because bias, I would say, is less intentional than people realize. It's almost unintentional for these models. It's very hard to parse out how the model is going to be biased when you're thinking about millions of points of data.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much going on under the hood, and the assumption could be, well, this entire model is biased, and that kind of is the end of the conversation, right? It's nice to hear some of the underlying bits there, right?
Well, I would always prefer a model that's biased to a model that's undertrained because you can erode the bias. You can use fine tuning to to pull back on that bias as long as it's not overfit. So like having a bias is normal. It's just like more patterns move in X direction. But something that's overfit is it's like gone past the point of return on concepts. Most of the models you use now are not overfit on very many things. But that's harder to walk back. But if it's just bias, that's actually something that you can just introduce new training data, erode some of this bias, and then you can actually surface things. There's so much underneath the bias. That's the part that's exciting, is when it's biased, it kind of indicates there's like this glacier underneath that you can surface that has way more concepts.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's also fascinating, and you've been working on, I noticed some of your posts, a lot of them, at least recently, were, as you mentioned, 2D. There seems to be a lot of animation and anime. Is that something you're really into, animation? Do you find yourself kind of geared towards that, at least recently?
Well, I'm an illustrator myself, so I do love illustration, 2D. I love animation and anime, but that's not the only reason I do it. I think people often assume it's because that's my like main passion. It is a passion of mine, but the reality is that it's just one of the hardest things to train technically. So from my perspective, if I can train something on 2D that looks really convincing, that is an easy one-to-one for realism or 3D, and very easy to walk back from and say like, okay, we're going to redo this on this concept. And it makes a big difference.
Okay. That makes sense. So it sounds like you're shooting, the ambition is high when it comes to mastering this ability to train 2D. And it sounds like that is one of the more difficult things to do.
It is, yeah. The models aren't predisposed to being like great with 2D because of that high noise piece. And it's harder to get like really comprehensive 2D data because there's so many styles that exist within 2D. So to be able to train it well is tricky, and you only see like a small number of trainers doing it very consistently. So yeah, I find it to be a really important challenge to sort of like benchmark and level set
Right.
a model, because then I surface a lot of the challenges of the model before I start doing something that the model's really already good at.
Right. 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 Absolutely. And in thinking about training workflows, you've worked on workflows a lot in the past few years. I know you were at Moon Valley, is that correct? And then you were at
Yes.
Comfy for a little bit. I imagine there was a lot of exposure to not just workflows that you're working on, but being able to integrate those workflows into real film production.
Yes.
And I think that's where there's such a huge difference, especially in understanding that it's not just pressing a button. Integrating this into real film productions, which could vary, the approaches, is difficult. Did you find that to be the case? What was your experience like with not just generation, but actually like building workflows in film for film?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, it's super super challenging to do still. People make
Yeah.
it seem like a lot is happening very quickly. I would push back and say not really. There's some major
Mm.
studios that I've been able to see behind the curtains of that are doing some very impressive things, but it's not super widely shared. When I was at Moon Valley, and also at that time Asteria was a part of Moon Valley, so I was at Asteria as well. I did have
Right.
a lot of exposure to traditional production pipelines, ranging from live action to animation to VFX. And what
Hmm.
they all shared was consistency was so, so important. And when we say
Absolutely.
consistency,
Mm.
consumer consistency is different than professional consistency. Professional consistency is really, truly like such a high bar. There cannot be a
Absolutely.
drift from, and I
Hmm.
think people miss this a little bit because it's not just because there's this perfectionism, but I think more important to highlight is because there's a team of decision makers who are deciding creative approaches and
Hmm.
have multiple sign-offs. So when you have that sort of environment and you're not just an individual or like a very small team of creators, but you're actually working within a traditional production environment,
Right.
um, you as the practitioner cannot veer from the art direction. You have to be able
Hmm.
to stay true to it. So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
work with a lot of clients around this now. I do a lot of consulting, and
Yeah.
the main thing that is really valuable at this stage, which I think a lot of people might be surprised by, is uh, knowing what you can't do with AI,
Mm.
as much as knowing what you can do right now in a professional environment, because a lot of time and money is wasted right now on people sort of overhyping workflows that work, but not at scale, not across multiple, like there, a lot of times workflows work within specific domains, but then once you try to break, this is where the bias comes in. Once you,
Hmm.
because these workflows are not customized, but rather like much more generalized, they rely on biases that exist within the model. And, I get people asking all the time, like, well, these models are getting so smart and so good. Why do you still fine tune? What's the point? And for me, it's like there's always going to be something that someone wants such a specific way that you just can't do by prompting, and doesn't make sense when you're thinking about a model that's been trained to generalize.
Yeah.
Even if it's
Yeah.
trained to generalize things in a custom way, that is still on its like base like level meant to be a generalist, and so it's always going to be even just slightly in opposition of consistency, and that slight opposition is like a deal breaker for a lot of companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've worked with filmmakers here and there, and you're absolutely right. The bar, it's the highest bar possible, and
Yeah.
I think a large part of it is because you're going to be seeing this on a huge screen.
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
so
that's a big one.
yeah.
And I only
So
know
if
of two
yeah.
models that can, I only know of two models that can generate in 4K right now. And neither of them are open source, and one of them is so closed source I don't think most people know it exists.
Okay. Which models are those?
I can't say which one that is. But the first one, actually, the first one is Mary, the model I worked on at Moon Valley. People don't really realize they're kind of sleeping on it a little bit. I don't work there anymore, so I'm not, I'm not being paid to do this. But like basically, that model continues to be the best to fine tune and has in my opinion, still the most like actual like production specific tools built in. LTX is close, but it's not, it still falls short a little bit. They don't do 4K yet, and the way that they do higher res is by upsampling, which isn't a native generation, and that's tough. That starts to bring in questions again around consistency, and it just adds another level of things that you have to take into consideration when you're trying to hit really like truly perfect consistency. Not to say it's bad and you can't use it, just to say like you have to take that into account when you think to use it.
I had a great time. Well, not a great time. There's been a lot of the asks are being able to add something to an existing footage, because certain directors and film production, they're like, I don't want to lose any of my crew. Like, we're gonna still film live. We're gonna keep everybody, and what I need help with is effects, or maybe adding something before and after some footage, right? Something they missed during production, possibly. So that's where what you're mentioning comes in, which is training, right?
Yeah.
And it would be specific to production and maybe a director's style. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's where I like to also highlight. A lot of people think of fine tuning because what they see in the space is like character consistency, style consistency. But actually, fine tuning has hit a really new level with the ability of in context LoRa's, or they're sometimes referred to as IC LoRa's. And these LoRa's just use much more complex sort of formulas. Like you can use multiple different video, audio, or image inputs during training to communicate like how you want the model to respond. Yeah. And so what I find super useful about that is when we're training characters and styles, like first of all, you can train like specific tasks. You can be like, okay, when I use this image input or this video input, I want this kind of response, but in the style, in the character, et cetera. So you suddenly can have a lot more control over like movement and things like that.
Right.
But what most people are kind of sleeping on, which is even more important, is that when we're normally training just like a style LoRa or a character LoRa, people are typically thinking in terms of you have text captions, that's your signal to the model, and then you have an example of an output, that's your data, that's like your video output. So if you had a character, you might have 15 clips of that character with 15 matching text captions that sort of mirror how you'd want to prompt to get that video that is in the data set. But what I think a lot of people don't even think about is how if you introduce data that's visual, like let's say you used a pose map as well, you want to do a pose IC LoRa, suddenly you've given the model a new layer of context for a consistent character. And now previously it had to figure out from the patterns in your captions and the patterns in your video, okay, what are we training? Because you can't say we are training this character. You're not able to tell the model that.
Right.
You tell the model what it's learning by presenting patterns to it. And that the dominant things in those patterns are the things the model should learn. So if you say the character's name in every caption and you have a visual of the character in every video, the model understands that's the consistent thing. If you have like a pose as well, and suddenly there's one pose and that correlates with one character in every single data point, now you have a very clear communication with the model. You are learning this character. You don't need to worry about any other characters. This is the character you care about. And models respond really quickly to that.
Right. Yeah, the space is changing so fast, it is hard to keep up. I'm sure you may feel the same way about the speed at which we're developing this technology. In terms of the video training, I feel like it's kind of at least for me, it's a new wave of training. I have experience with image training very, very briefly. In fact, your post about training I came across on LinkedIn, and I'm like, this is amazing. Maybe I could do this. And then I looked into the AI toolkit, right?
Nice.
And so we have trained 2 LoRa's that we put on Hugging Face. And the idea is not just to, be a web app that generates video, but be kind of a horror entertainment company. And like an AI ecosystem. So you might find this interesting because I was training a found footage style. So I'm trying to capture, it's almost the opposite of what people want, which is trying to capture realism. I was trying to capture like static and also maybe like a night vision sort of green hue. That was a bit challenging to do, but it could just be my ignorance too. Right? So
it takes a while. Well, I always tell people this because a lot of the clients that hire are thinking like, okay, but we, because I do like a lot of exploratory and R&D work, and I do like traditional like normal work, but my prices are exploratory R&D prices most of the time. Sometimes I work out a deal, but it depends. But clients are naturally like, okay, well, how can I train someone on my team to do this? And I always try to be really like mindful about that, but like fair in that I can definitely help you train your team, but the techniques are actually the easiest part to learn. The part that takes a long time to learn is understanding how the model sees and being able to adjust your data and adjust your approach based on the response, being able to pick up on little signals that you're seeing within the output, etc. And that just takes time. You just need to train lots of models to be able to learn that. So that's the part I always like to say to people is like, a good trainer is good because they've done this hundreds of times, not because they're like, I would say the one advantage I have over a lot of people is that I have a really visual imagination, so I can actually like hold in my head like comparative visuals when I'm training, and that is an advantage. Like people who cannot visualize struggle a little bit more with fine tuning. It doesn't mean that they can't do it, but they have to figure out different techniques to support themselves. But like beyond that, like I think most people can become pretty advanced fine tuners. They just have to do it. Like I've been fine tuning since late 2022. I would say at least dozens of models a week, if not hundreds some week, if I'm working with a company directly, and that changes your perspective.
Absolutely, and there's a progression of frameworks. I think if I'm not mistaken, yourself and your partner in business. I forgot it. Sorry, I forgot his name. I do want to bring him on.
Timothy. Yeah, no,
That's right. Yeah, Timothy. So, if I'm not mistaken, you both are essentially creating new evaluation frameworks. Is that correct?
Yeah, so they are technically the evaluation frameworks we have been using for a long time, but we realized that there aren't that many people in this space who have, like, no one's really defined this for LoRa fine tuning. And so we were like, well, I'm sure people are doing this already. I don't think we're reinventing the wheel here, but no one's written it down and put it out there as like, hey, here's how we should be evaluating LoRa's. And I was really happy when we released, it was, the paper was called Forgetting on Purpose. And it was just a position paper, just sort of saying like, hey, here's how we think about things. These are the techniques we're using, et cetera. And we'll probably be releasing more methodology and position papers going forward. That being said, I was pleasantly surprised by how many people really resonated with that in the research community. And it's definitely, I think, there's a lot of people really seeking out fine-tuning techniques, and the unfortunate reality is that until really this boom that's come with LTX, which is very specific to LTX, it's not really specific to other models. I don't think a lot of people were trying to fine-tune on a professional level. And so the fine-tuning practices that exist in the space are predominantly focused on speed and like low GPU resource. Whereas most of the time, if you're a professional, you are going to have access to some pretty powerful GPUs, and it's fine if the model takes a week to train because you want it to be perfect. And so a lot of the like hyperparameters in the space, a lot of the methodology recommendations are not ideal for most professionals. And so we're seeing this shift now because LTX has been supporting fine tuning. And I really love that as a model company, they have like pushed fine tuning to the front, because I think that is really important. But we're also still seeing a lot of the same techniques from prior models that get carried over that really maybe aren't the most ideal techniques, or they're reflective of how foundational models are trained, which you can draw a ton of learnings for LoRa's, but the way you train a LoRa or like a small data set fine tune is kind of in opposition of how a foundational model is trained. So you really just want to pull learnings from foundational training, not like use that as a prescriptive identifier of like how you should train.
Absolutely. And I would imagine with the amount of, well, you've been doing this since 2022. You've trained hundreds, I'm sure you've trained models hundreds of times in LoRa's. There's a lot of experimentation going on in R&D. I'd love to hear about some of the challenges you face, like maybe walking me through a project that was challenging in terms of getting whatever end result you wanted. Maybe something you're really proud of very much that you were able to figure out, right?
Yeah, so I'm actually working on a project right now that is sort of midway, but I am very excited about like the long-term results. And
I'd love to hear about it.
it sort of overlaps with a lot of the animation tests you've been seeing. But basically, a lot of people, like I had mentioned earlier, IC LoRa's are becoming more and more popular. This idea of training controls into the LoRa's. But again, not that many people are using them in like combination with consistent characters or consistent styles so much. They're using them more to build new tooling and utility, which is awesome, but a very different approach. To build like new utility tools, you need to basically build very large data sets or like semi-large data sets, and they need to be quite diverse. Versus if you are training a character, you need to both be able to train this very small data set style or character with a control in a way that like the model can actually understand. And so I really think that right now animation is underserved because a lot of the controls are realism first, and so the physics are very realism focused. It's like squash and stretch is like not really, it's a principle in animation, but it's really hard to communicate through AI, and so you need to come up with new ways of giving driving information. So I've been trying this thing where you take segment maps and you train these character models to understand that a segment map means that the character should exist in that space, and that should be where they're moving in. And what I need is I have to work with models that have a native understanding of controls. And there's really like 3 that are available in this space. There's more than 3, but like the ones that are truly supported in the space are the WAN models that have fun. It's basically WAN's control training round. I like the WAN models a lot, but that's trained after the fact. It's not in the core model. It's like an additional model that's trained on those transformers. So it's not the end of the world. I've had good success training those, but it's not as like pure as like something like LTX, where the controls are trained directly in. And then Mary, I had the opportunity to train on Mary a lot when I was at Moon Valley, and now I believe they do have training now on Mary that's available to like some customers. But basically, similarly, the controls were trained directly in. So what happens when you have controls that are a part of how the model functions and processes is that those controls can be abstracted. And So I really would love to be able to do the same animation test on LTX, but because of how they've trained that model, it's very restrictive around 2D. It definitely doesn't have a lot of 2D in it based on how it responds. It seems like it's underfit around 2D, which becomes a challenge in and of itself. You suddenly like don't have all of the hooks that you need to like grab onto 2D. And then in addition, some of the like tooling they've done have adjusted like flicker and create a different understanding of how like frames work, have a different understanding of like even frame rate is very different. And high noise is so much like sacrificed as well for that LTX piece that I really wanted to do the same test in LTX because it has this native training in it, but was really limited around the results. So I've reached out to the LTX team and I'm really hoping that they'll expose a few more training parameters. Otherwise, I need to build them into my own trainer, which is totally fine. But I think what's interesting to me and what I really wanted to highlight to their team is I don't think this is a lost cause, but without some sort of will to expand on this, and there's ways to do that, it's going to be very difficult for people to leverage this model, and that's really a shame because it would be so powerful if you could do 2D with it.
Okay, yeah, I've played around. That makes sense. I've played around with LTX and WAN, and for a different reason. And I'm curious to also hear your thoughts on. Sometimes we'll need to reach out to the teams that train these models or release them. And in horror, there's an underserved community of creators that have been kind of discarded by some of the major platforms and safety filters. Very much needed. We want to keep the output of these models safe, and there's a lot to unpack there. On the flip side, you can't have, in my opinion, the evolution of film without R-rated content. That is a huge part of film. I mean, even Midsommar, it's not straight gore, but the visceral, psychological aspect of someone's mental health breaking down.
I mean, you watch people jumping off of cliffs and dying, so like, there's definitely gore.
Yes, there is at the very tail end there. In fact, it's kind of a movie I could only see once. I haven't seen it again because I can handle gore, but when it comes to like psychological breakdown, I find that very disturbing.
I'm flip side.
Really?
I don't hate gore or anything like that, but I'm definitely like really I get really reactive to gore. I don't like things jumping out at me necessarily. But I love psychological thrillers. I used to write when I was doing plays. Like I was once criticized by one of my professors because he was like, I feel like I'm just watching someone lose their mind on stage. And I'm like, that was the point. Like I love that. Yes. I wanted you to feel that. So success. But it turns out that not everyone loves that.
No, not everyone does. I definitely appreciate it. In fact, in diving into different aspects of horror, there's this emotional intensity that occurs, as mentioned in Midsommar. The only model I found that was really good at expressing an emotional breakdown was VO 3.1, especially with language and dialogue. Yeah. That is horrible across the board, I've found. At least
that you could train into LTX, especially when you're talking in terms of realism. Like that's something that LTX should, like an audio to video, you should be able to get like a pretty decent response.
So it does seem like LTX is kind of the winner right now. I need to look into it after this.
Well, for realism, for sure. And the other nice thing is, like, speaking to what you're saying about gore, so I know, like, I don't know if you were using Midjourney early days, but I remember there's this story that their CEO used to tell about how they had a small group of beta users very, very early that they allowed to just prompt whatever, encourage, just prompt whatever. And it was so disturbing to them, like, the results that the model was able to do, that they just put, like, hard restrictions on it. That being said, I do think you would have to have a model company and platform similar to like, unfortunately, I have to bring it up this way, but similar to the sex industry and like that industry,
Sure.
they have their own platforms that are like specifically like the content moderation is specific to that world.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I think that you could definitely do that. Like you can run all of this stuff locally. I mean, like if you're running like an LTX locally or on like a rented GPU,
Yeah.
then you're great. Like all of the, you will not get that type of moderation issue. I think the only model company that I can think of who like at one point had internal moderation was Stability. At one point they like dumbed down certain like tokenization in their model. I don't know if BFL still does that at all, because that's the same team. They just started their own company.
Right.
But basically, like that would be the only concern. But not very many model companies do that, particularly not like Alibaba and stuff. I don't think they care to like actively weed out everything in their data set.
Absolutely, and it's a balance right now that I think it we're kind of the first ones to do this is to kind of go very niche. So there's a balance between allowing violence and allowing this visceral body horror and preventing more of the, like you said, the sex industry. I mean, like there's not safe for work models out there. I
Yeah.
mean, Civit AI has a bunch of NSFW stuff,
Yeah.
not safe for work. Not exactly our cup of tea over here,
Right, but
but
you can use a
yeah,
similar model.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
you can set it
yeah,
up in a similar way where it's
right,
curated for that intention and people know going
yeah,
in. And I'm sure like you would get, I mean, especially VFX, like even
mm,
non-horror, if you had like a library of Lauras that work on different models that
mhm,
help to do like gore that makes sense within a filmmaking context, I'm sure
yeah,
that would also translate to other parts of the filmmaking industry.
absolutely. And more it's looking like we're going to be training custom models for specific aspects of horror.
Yeah.
There's ways of moderating it where you can allow only violence. AWS has an amazing Amazon Web Services has an amazing moderation system where you could allow.
I'm familiar with
Yeah.
it,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So I that's my day job is AWS, and I live within it probably way too long. Way too much of my life is consumed with Amazon Web Services, but you already know I'm just preaching to the choir. You can allow certain things and then be more strict on others. Um, so we have covered a lot of grounds. Spirituality. We've covered training. Your background in theater. I'd love to hear more about some of your favorite pieces of art. I mean, I'm sure there's a large part of theater that's it can be musical. Not everything is a musical, obviously.
Yeah.
Were you more focused on um, just straight sort of acting? Was there music also? Did you get into like musical theater at all?
So
Um,
I didn't study musical theater, but I've done some musical theater, especially when I was
okay.
younger.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
musicals a lot, but I was
Okay.
always more focused on like straight plays, like David
Yeah.
Mamet, Edward Albee, like that
Okay.
type of stuff.
Yeah.
And so like that was always my interest.
Mhm.
Sam Shepard, these
Yeah.
really kind of a little bit thrillers in their own right in some ways. They can really
Mhm.
like get deep and emotional. And
Mhm.
then for like film and stuff, of course, I love animation. I love like really old anime, like
Uh-huh.
Perfect
Uh-huh.
Blue and Paprika and stuff like that. Which Perfect Blue it was a
Mm.
big, yeah, obviously a big inspiration to a lot
Mm.
of
Mm.
thriller filmmakers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even the I rewatched it recently because I've been doing some tests with it, and the end always gets me. I'm always like,
Mm.
there's so much. This is like they tell you throughout the whole film what's about to happen, and they do it
Mm.
so subtly that like when you hit the end, you're like,
Yeah. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course. So I love that. I love Ari Aster's stuff. I love Midsummer. Um, I would say really like for horror, like I really like old horror. Like I like Carrie. I like Rosemary's Baby, that type of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Rosemary's Baby is amazing. I love the '70s had a particular. It's like grainy in a way. It has this sort of interesting fade occurring. Um, yeah, that Carrie's good. Carrie's good too. It's a good one. Um, you mentioned earlier your ability to visualize, your ability to compare visualizations in parallel, and it brings to mind something that David Lynch said, which was when he was inspired with an idea, it would just come to him in little pieces. It was almost like a little piece of a puzzle was coming to him, and it was a part of a larger um, creative work that existed in a different room. So I'm curious how any creative idea may come to you. For me, it's music. If I listen to music, a visual comes, and that is how that starts for me. Is that inspiration? Is there anything in particular that inspires you that results in visualization?
Well, I think like everyone, other art
Yeah,
always inspires and like
yeah,
cuts pretty deep.
yeah.
So I always try to like go to museums, watch movies, like listen to music. I
Yeah.
have, I'm I definitely have that experience where like I can listen to music and something can come up. But oftentimes what I find is that I just have these ideas that come in like similar to what David Lynch says, like where it's
Hmm.
just like,
Hmm.
oh, I have this part of a story now, just
Hmm.
like someone just told it to me. Like I'm just sitting there and
Hmm.
suddenly it's like, oh, okay, this is, and it can be totally unrelated to whatever I'm doing in the moment. And usually I try to write those down
Hmm. Hmm.
and go circle back to them later. And I also have like long form, like world building I've done over years where I
Yeah,
have,
yeah,
different characters in the same universe that I'm sort of pulling forward and exploring. I really love exploring emotionality in characters. So a lot of the stuff that I do for my own work is really around this idea of just like emotional experience. I was working on this short film back when I
yeah.
was at Asteria that we never finished, but we got pretty far with. But it was basically a short. I lived in Paris for a couple of years, and it was like a really beautiful place to live, but also a very isolating experience. And so I
Wow.
wrote this
Okay.
short
Okay.
film, yeah, about this woman who like is just in her apartment alone, and the other character is like the sound and shadows from outside. And
Hmm.
Paris is a very
Okay.
loud place, so it's this like sometimes she would open and it would just be like silence and then this wall of sound hitting.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
Sometimes it'd feel like whispers, but it was definitely a thriller. Like she got lost in her one bedroom apartment. She couldn't figure out how to get out of her apartment. And the whole
Okay.
story is her just trying to figure out how to get out of her apartment because she is
Hmm.
mentally kind of trapped herself in
Trapped.
it.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit of a reflection on like the post-pandemic anxiety, but also on like being foreign and living in a place that you definitely feel out of place in. And so that mix of those experiences and that sort of sense of isolation really inform this idea of like, what if like the thing between you and feeling trapped
Hmm.
is you so much that like you have to face that to be able to even leave your house.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that to be the case in New York City, actually, because it's interesting concept, cities as isolation, right? Where
Yeah.
cities can produce isolation. New York City being so busy, the subway is an endless source of inspiration, for better or worse. The emotionality aspect is interesting to me. You're speaking my language because something that I've been really interested in doing is a short made with AI that takes place in a single apartment. So it's sounding very familiar, or similar, I should say, where someone has an emotional breakdown based on the fact that they're in a relationship that's toxic, and it's
Right.
gotten to this point where they just can't take it anymore. So they begin sort of this very horrible argument with their partner. And I've always thought that could be really interesting to pull off in a realistic in a realistic way with AI.
I could see
don't
that.
I haven't seen that done just yet, honestly.
No, it
Yeah.
doesn't sound like anything I've seen before either,
Yeah.
but I could see that being really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, we have covered quite a bit. I would love to end it with some advice you might give, because
Sure.
you have so much experience to pull from, and I imagine there's someone like yourself that is at the beginning of their journey of either making a shift like you did from a creative medium such as theater into exploring AI. Like, what advice would you give them? Where can they start? And maybe some of the challenges you face could be avoided somehow if they're starting on this journey. Maybe the challenge is necessary. All of the above.
Yeah, I think don't try to tackle everything at once. Find like the platform or the model that feels comfortable for you to test,
Yeah.
and try to do a task with it. Try to like if it's making a character in different angles or like telling a little story, like you people need to learn the basics of just interacting with these models before they can get super deep with them. So like just giving yourself that space to play is so important in working with AI. It's, I think, where the most fun comes out as well. And I actually try to like carve out that type of time every week, to just be like, okay, I'm just gonna play with a concept. I just want to like
Mm.
see how it responds and like get a sense, because you'll learn so much about different models just by playing. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And I suppose one very last question. We've yeah, it's been about an hour already.
Oh yeah, all
Um,
good.
okay, good. I don't want to take up too much of your time today. I think one of the big questions is, where is all of this headed? What is it going to look like in a year? How is art going to change? How is film going to change? Being in the industry adjacent to film production, theater, where do you see all this going? What does it look like in a year, 5 years?
Well, I think it's going to equalize a lot. I think a lot of people who aren't like active participants in the film industry and media and entertainment
Hmm.
is that currently it's very difficult to get a production greenlit and funded, and that's why we see so many sequels and things like that. And they're great companies like Bloomhouse that worked with the back rooms, that type of thing, who are doing these awesome models for how companies can work with creators and everyone can still own a piece of the pie and still like
Hmm.
make a living. But the industry has shifted. People aren't becoming millionaires from projects very often, not the way they were maybe 5, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I think that AI does equalize. I think that like what someone could make as an indie, it has gotten so much bigger than what it
Hmm.
used to be. And what someone can make with AI as a studio, actually at this stage is still pretty complex. And like if you have ownership of your IP and you can make decisions that allow you to work within the bias a little bit, and like when I say work within the bias, I mean like work with styles that are easy to get consistency from, that type of thing, which is much more approachable for new creators.
Hmm.
You can tell stories. And I think
Right.
most indie creators are just doing this to tell stories. And so I do think we're going to see more and more, just like the YouTube boom, this is going to be even a different
Mm.
level of that, of like
Yeah.
individual creators, small teams. Like I think you could make a horror film from beginning to end with the right approach and like
Yeah.
a very
Absolutely.
small budget.
Absolutely. Yes. Um, we're definitely seeing an indie creator boom with um, some of the recent successes in horror movies. Well, I will leave it at that. And thank you so much, Minta, for joining us. You've had an amazing journey, and
Yeah.
it is impressive. It is very helpful too, and inspirational. Honestly, you've inspired me myself to begin my own training journey. So, yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
Fantastic.
awesome,
Thank you.
awesome.
Well, thank you for having me. I always appreciate being
Yeah,
able to talk about my work and all
yeah,
of that.
absolutely, absolutely. It's been amazing. So thank you.